You're late tonight. I was starting to think you weren't coming. But here you are, right on time for the story I've been holding on to all week. Pull your chair closer. Not too close to the fire, though. You'll want to keep your back warm for this one. Trust me. You ever been to Vermont? Beautiful place. Mountains, forests, lakes so clear you can see straight to the bottom. My grandfather lived there for most of his life. Born there, raised there, thought he'd die there. And he almost did, just not the way he expected. He was a park ranger. Spent 40 years walking those mountains, knowing every trail, every clearing, every abandoned structure left behind by loggers and settlers from 100 years ago. He knew those woods better than he knew his own house. But there was one place he never went, one place he marked on his maps with a red X and the words "Stay away." A cabin, deep in the northern woods, about 15 miles from the nearest road. No path leading to it. No reason for anyone to go there. But people did. Hikers. Curious teenagers. Photographers looking for that perfect shot of an old abandoned building covered in moss and time. And my grandfather would have to go looking for them. Because everyone who went into that cabin never came out. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe they got lost. Maybe they fell through rotten floorboards. Maybe they ran into a bear or got hypothermia. All reasonable explanations, right? That's what my grandfather thought too. At first. The first disappearance happened in 1967. A college student from Boston. He told his roommate he was going hiking in Vermont for the weekend. His car was found parked at a trailhead. His backpack was found hanging on a tree branch about a mile into the forest. And his camera was found on the porch of that cabin. But he was never found. Search parties combed those woods for 2 weeks. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers from 3 counties. Nothing. It was like he'd simply vanished into thin air. The case went cold. His family put up missing person posters that eventually faded in the rain. My grandfather was part of that search. He was young then, maybe 25. It was one of his first big cases. And he remembered standing on that cabin's porch, looking at that camera, and feeling something he'd never felt before in those woods. The feeling that he was being watched, not by animals, not by other searchers, by something inside the cabin, something looking at him through the gaps in the boarded-up windows, something that wanted him to come inside. He didn't. His supervising ranger, an old-timer named Dutch, grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "Don't even think about it, kid. We searched the perimeter. We don't go in." "Why not?" my grandfather asked. "He could be in there. He could be hurt." Dutch looked at the cabin for a long moment, then back at my grandfather. "If he went in there, then he's not hurt, and we can't help him." My grandfather thought Dutch was being superstitious. Old mountain folklore. Ghost stories told to scare rookies. But Dutch made him promise. Made him swear he wouldn't go into that cabin. Not for a missing person. Not for any reason. And for the next 15 years, my grandfather kept that promise. Then came 1982. A family of 4. Parents and 2 kids. They were camping in the area. The father told the campground host they were going on a day hike. They never came back. 3 days later, my grandfather found their tent, found their car, found their trail, and found them. Or rather, found where they'd been. All 4 of them had walked to that cabin. My grandfather could see their footprints in the soft dirt, leading right up to the front door. 2 large prints, 2 small ones. The door was slightly ajar, just a few inches, like someone had pushed it open but hadn't quite gone through. And on the porch, arranged in a neat line, were 4 pairs of shoes. The father's hiking boots, the mother's sneakers, 2 tiny pairs of children's shoes. But no people, no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just shoes, neatly placed, like they'd taken them off before entering someone's home. My grandfather stood there for a long time, staring at those shoes, staring at that partially open door. And he heard something, faint, so faint he thought he might be imagining it. Singing, a child's voice, coming from inside the cabin, singing a nursery rhyme. Ring around a rosy, pocket full of posies. He took a step toward the door. Then another. His hand reached for his flashlight. Dutch was retired by then. There was no one to stop him, no one to grab his arm and pull him back. His fingers touched the door handle, and then he heard a second voice, an adult voice, his own voice, coming from inside the cabin, calling his name. "Come inside. We've been waiting for you." That's when he ran. Ran faster than he'd ever run in his life. Didn't stop until he reached his truck. Didn't look back. Didn't tell anyone what he'd heard. The family was never found. The case was closed as a tragic disappearance. Probably fell into a ravine, the official report said. Bodies might never be recovered. But my grandfather knew better. He knew they'd gone into that cabin, and he knew they weren't coming out. Now, if you're sitting there wondering what's inside that cabin, what happens to people who go in, well, you're in luck, because that's exactly what I'm about to tell you. But these stories, they take time to tell properly. They need to be shared with people who understand, who listen, who come back to hear more. So if you want to know what my grandfather discovered about that cabin, if you want to hear what happened when he finally broke his promise and went inside, then make sure you're here next time. Subscribe. Ring that bell. Keep your seat by this fire warm. Because once this story really starts, you won't want to miss a single word. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. The year was 1989. 7 years after the family disappeared. My grandfather was 52 years old. Still a ranger, but thinking about retirement. His hair had gone white. His knees hurt on long hikes. And he'd started having nightmares about that cabin. Always the same dream. He'd be standing on the porch, looking at those children's shoes. And the door would slowly swing open. And he'd see himself inside. An older version of himself, sitting in a rocking chair, smiling, waving him in. "Come inside," dream grandfather would say. "You belong here. You've always belonged here." He'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, and he wouldn't be able to fall back asleep. His wife asked him what was wrong. He never told her. How could he? How could he explain that he was being haunted by a place he'd never entered? But then something happened that changed everything. A young ranger joined the station, fresh out of college, eager, confident. Her name was Sarah, and she reminded my grandfather of himself when he was young, full of questions, full of determination to solve the unsolved cases. One day, she came to him with a file, the missing persons cases, all of them, dating back to 1967. She'd been doing research, compiling data, and she'd found something. "Look at the dates," she said, spreading papers across his desk. "Every disappearance happens in October, always October, and always on a night when there's no moon." My grandfather looked at the dates. She was right. October 3rd, 1967. October 17th, 1982. October 8th, 1975. October 21st, 1978. 8 disappearances over 22 years. All in October. All during the new moon. "There's a pattern," Sarah said, "which means we can predict it. The next new moon in October is in 3 weeks. We should stake out the area. Set up cameras. Catch whoever or whatever is doing this." My grandfather's blood ran cold. "No, absolutely not. That area is off limits." "Why?" Sarah challenged. "Because of some old superstition? Because rangers from 50 years ago told stories about ghosts? We have technology now. We have radios, GPS, night vision. We can solve this." "You don't understand," my grandfather said. "That cabin is not what you think." "Then what is it?" Sarah pressed. "Explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, it looks like a serial killer has been using that location for decades, and everyone's too scared of ghost stories to actually investigate." She had a point, a logical, rational point. And my grandfather didn't have a logical, rational answer. All he had were feelings, intuitions, the memory of hearing his own voice calling to him from inside an empty cabin. But Sarah wasn't going to let it go. He could see it in her eyes. She was going with, or without permission, with or without him. So he made a decision. If she was going, he was going with her. Better to be there to pull her back if something went wrong than to let her go alone. They planned carefully, told no one, hiked in during the day, Set up camp a quarter-mile from the cabin. Waited for night to fall. October 19th, 1989. New moon. The forest was pitch black. They approached the cabin at midnight. Sarah had a flashlight, a radio, a camera. My grandfather had his service pistol and a sense of dread, so heavy it felt like a physical weight on his chest. The cabin looked the same as it always had. Weathered wood, boarded windows, porch sagging with age. The door was closed. Sarah started taking pictures, documenting everything. She walked around perimeter, checking for footprints, disturbed soil, any sign of recent activity. My grandfather stood on the porch, staring at that door, and he realized something. In all his years, in all his visits to this place, he'd never actually tried to open it. He'd never tested whether it was locked. He just assumed it was forbidden. His hand reached out, touched the handle. It was ice cold despite the mild October weather. "What are you doing?" Sarah whispered. "Testing a theory," he said, and he turned the handle. It wasn't locked. The door swung open easily, smoothly, like the hinges had been oiled yesterday. Inside was darkness, complete darkness. Their flashlights couldn't penetrate it. The beams just stopped at the threshold, like they were shining into a wall of black ink. "That's not possible," Sarah muttered. She pulled out a flare, struck it, and tossed it through the doorway. The flare disappeared. No light, no sound of it hitting the floor. Just gone. They stood there, staring, and then they heard it. Footsteps, coming from inside. Multiple footsteps, walking toward the door. Sarah grabbed my grandfather's arm. "We need to go. Now." But before they could move, something appeared in the doorway. A figure, tall, wearing old clothes. A man my grandfather had never seen before, but somehow recognized. The college student from 1967. He hadn't aged a day. "You can come in now," the student said, his voice flat, emotionless. "The waiting is over. Everyone's here. We've been expecting you." More figures appear behind him. The family of four. The father, the mother, the two children, still the same age they'd been 7 years ago. Behind them, more people, dozens of people, all standing in that impossible darkness, all staring out with empty eyes. "Join us," they said in unison. "Come inside. You belong here." Sarah fired her pistol into the air. The sound echoed through the forest. The figures didn't react, didn't flinch, just kept staring, kept smiling. My grandfather grabbed Sarah and ran, pulled her away from that porch, away from those reaching hands, away from that darkness that wanted to swallow them whole. They didn't stop running until they reached their truck, drove straight to the station. And my grandfather did something he should have done years ago. He told the truth. They didn't believe him, of course. How could they? A cabin full of people who hadn't aged. Darkness that swallowed light. Voices speaking in unison. It sounded insane. But Sarah backed him up, showed them the photos, except the photos showed nothing. Just a normal abandoned cabin. Empty porch. Closed door. No figures. No darkness. Like none of it had happened. The department put my grandfather on administrative leave. Ordered him to see a counselor. Suggested maybe it was time for early retirement. Too much stress. Too many years in the woods. Sometimes the isolation gets to people. Sarah quit a month later. Left Vermont and never came back. My grandfather tried calling her once. She answered but didn't want to talk about it. "Some things," she said, "are better left alone. We were lucky. We got out. Not everyone does." Then she hung up. He never heard from her again. My grandfather did retire, moved away from Vermont, tried to forget about the cabin, but it didn't forget about him. Every October, during the new moon, he'd get a phone call, always at midnight, always the same voice, his own voice. "You open the door. That means you're invited. The invitation never expires. We'll be waiting." This went on for years. Even after he moved across the country. Even after he changed his number. Every October, every new moon, the phone would ring. He told me about it when I was 18. made me promise I'd never go to Vermont, never try to find that cabin. It wants people, he said. It needs people. And once it knows you exist, once you get too close, it won't stop calling. It won't stop waiting. I asked him what he thought it was. A haunted house? A portal to somewhere else? A living thing disguised as a building? He shook his head. I don't know. Maybe it's all those things. Maybe it's none of them. But I know this. Everyone who goes inside is still there, still conscious, still aware, trapped in that darkness. And they want company. They want more people to join them. Because misery doesn't just love company. It needs it. It feeds on it. My grandfather died in 2003. Heart attack in his sleep. Peaceful, the doctor said. But I helped clean out his house afterward. And I found something that made me wonder. A calendar. With every October new moon circled in red. And next to the most recent date, just 2 weeks before he died, he'd written, "They're getting louder." I burned that calendar. Didn't tell anyone about it. Didn't want to think about what it meant. Whether they'd finally gotten through to him somehow. Whether he'd seen something in those final weeks that made him afraid to sleep. But here's the thing that really haunts me. Before he died, my grandfather added a codicil to his will. A strange request. He wanted to be cremated, which wasn't unusual. But he wanted his ashes scattered in 3 different states. A third in California. A third in Texas. A third in Maine. When I asked the lawyer why, he showed me the note my grandfather had left. It said, "Don't let them put me back together. Don't let them bring me home." I honored his wishes, drove to all 3 states, scattered his ashes in rivers, oceans, forests, made sure there was nothing left to gather, nothing to bring back. To bring back where? I've never been to Vermont. I've never looked for that cabin. I don't even know if it's still there. Maybe the forest has reclaimed it. Maybe it burned down. Maybe it never existed at all, except in the minds of people who stayed in the woods too long. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I think about those people standing in the darkness. The college student, the family, all the others, waiting, always waiting, for someone to come inside and join them. And I think about my grandfather's voice on the phone, calling himself, inviting himself in. And I wonder, if I went to Vermont, if I somehow found that cabin, would I hear my grandfather's voice too? Would he be standing there in the darkness with the others, asking me to come inside? I hope I never find out. And I hope you never find out either. Because that's the thing about stories like this. They're not just entertainment. They're warnings. They're the way we pass down knowledge about things that don't make sense. Things that can't be explained. Things that exist in the spaces between logic and nightmare. So here's my warning to you, passed down from my grandfather. If you're ever hiking and you find an old cabin in the woods, and something tells you not to go inside, and every instinct you have says turn around and walk away, listen to it. Don't be curious. Don't be brave. Don't think you're the exception to the rule. Just walk away. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some invitations, once accepted, last forever. My grandfather opened that door for 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds. And it haunted him for the rest of his life. Imagine what happens to the people who actually go inside. The fire's dying down now, and it's getting late. Later than I usually stay up. But I wanted to tell you this story. Wanted you to know about my grandfather and that cabin, and the people who are still waiting there. If the story made you think, made you look at your own door a little differently tonight, made you wonder about the places we're told not to go, then you understand, and you should stick around, because there are more stories where this came from, more warnings, more truths wrapped in terror. Subscribe if you haven't already. Come back to the fire. Bring others if you trust them. These stories need to be told. They need to be heard. They need to be remembered. And whatever you do, wherever you go, if you see an old cabin in the woods and everyone says to stay away, and there's a feeling in the air that something's not right, keep walking. Don't look back. And never, ever go inside. The fire's out. Time for both of us to go home. Lock your doors tonight. And be grateful you're not in Vermont. Until next time, may your paths be clear, and may the places you're not supposed to go stay far behind you. Good night.